So welcome to the closing plenary of our online conference. So I'm speaking on behalf of Anja Lietz, who will moderate this session. In the next hour, we will, together with our panelists, highlight additional policy success factors. You can learn about survey results, receive some insights into promising international developments, and we will call together once more stakeholders to take urgent action on chemical pollution, seen the devastating impact on children's health. So now I have here with me Renate Künast, member of the German Parliament and former Minister of Agriculture in Germany. And great. So I give first already the floor to Renate, who can then tell you a little bit more about the session that went on in the room, highly hazardous pesticides, that she moderated. Renate, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you that I'm the first one, because we have plenary session there. So it's always ringing and I have to go back. But I wanted to stay here with you because it's really, for me, it's a very important point to discuss about the hazardous, highly hazardous pesticides, even because Germany is a production and exporting country. What are we doing there? We had a discussion with someone from Sikkim, Sri Lanka, FAO, and you, Ingrid. And to tell you, and that I think is the most important point, both Sri Lanka and Sikkim got policy awards. And so we looked about what is the role model that is the special point on them. I think one of the, when we look at this, one of the most important point for me was that someone said, you need political blessing. That's a funny word. Political blessing means what? That you just have to use and have someone above who says we want to do it. And we also figured out that sometimes in the role models, the point was that there was one person focusing on it and saying, I want to go the way. I want to put myself together, collaborate with others. And so we really discussed here about political blessing, forming a group of willing and include more, which also means go to the industries, talk with them, and get them in, get them on board, collaborate with the health sector and with research. I think this is a very important point, that you don't go in front, but just you broaden your perspective and your possibilities of, you could say, of cooperation, and people that also fight with you, coming with the different arguments. So in this point, we had the argument, especially of the children. Are we poisoning our children? What does it do there? We have the death toll, the suicide rates, and we have, learned that meanwhile, other countries are trying to follow, like, for example, Indonesia, trying to follow the way Sikkim or Sri Lanka is going. We've got a Rotterdam Convention from '98, and see that a convention like this is not enough. We have the WHO program implementing suicide prevention in countries, and maybe the WTO is one of the factors there where we see how we get broader cooperation. You see, if only people looking on, for example, suicide rates or on pesticide, that they're hazardous and so dangerous, you are always alone. I also figured out that when I want to change something in agriculture policy to be more sustainable, it always makes sense to cooperate with people from different parts, like WHO, like the like the health sector. We see that we do need success stories to convince others. And one of the most important points, I think, I do not want to mention all things, we have a special situation. Everyone is in this moment talking about agriculture and food security due to the wheat prices. We don't have shortage of food, but we have a short increasing wheat prices due to Russia invading Ukraine. We are talking about with World Bank and a lot of donors about how to organize food security. How to organize food security. And in this point, I think this is exactly the point where we should implement our question. How can we produce food in a sustainable way, and also look at the health question at this point? If not in this situation, there are a lot of, as my last, a lot of different and more ideas. For example, give information, do some hand-in-hand initiative at FAO, for example, and focus on government and ask what are they investing in. So this was the broad perspective, starting with political will and cooperation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Renato, for your report. That sounds like you had a really exciting session and inspiring debates and many insights from the panelists you had, and which work, I know, for a long time already on these issues. Oh, there's Eduardo. That's great. Eduardo, do you have also, can you put your camera on? Then Renato, if you need to leave, we thank you so much. Thank you for being here with us, for having been with us. And yes, please, all the best for the plenary debates now in the German parliament. Thank you and goodbye. So I hand over to Eduardo.
Thank you, Ingrid. I hope you can hear me well. I was having some connectivity issues, but I think they're fixed. Okay, great. And I'd like to take the opportunity again to thank you for inviting me to moderate the parallel session we had on toxic metals with a focus on lead in paint. And we had an amazing panel which shared with us their experiences, lessons learned, and recommendations in addressing lead in paint to avoid their negative impact on the children's health and the environment. For the sake of time, I will be doing a great effort to summarize some of the most important success factors that the panel considers critical to advance lead-free policies. I think everyone unanimously agree that coordination and multi-stakeholder engagement is key. All the stakeholders need to be on board and working towards the same objective. And all stakeholders should be involved in the process from the beginning to phase out the use of lead in paint. Both this coordination is important at the national level and also at the international level. For instance, all efforts to ensure that there's engagement from the relevant stakeholders should be made by making them part of the coordination of the all processes and the cooperation and the institutional level between the relevant ministries and the national authorities, as well as conducting awareness raising campaigns at the local and national level. And at the international level, this coordination is also important and kind of emulates the same structure of the national level. So the coordination of all IGOs, intergovernmental organizations that are working on the topic, the UN agencies, the paint industry, the civil society, and other relevant stakeholders, which as explained by some of our panelists, has been a success factor to advance lead paint legislations around the world. And here I would like to highlight quickly the work of the Global Alliance to Eliminate Lead in Paint and their success as a coordination mechanism for the lead work globally, and how successful they've been in fostering partnerships and synergies to address this important issue, and also to help other countries to learn what is going on and what other countries are doing to tackle and set up legislation on lead paint, learn about their challenges and best practices, and in that case, support the progress in those countries that are still working towards having their legislation. It was also mentioned that the multi-stakeholder engagement should be or should start from the very beginning, from the planning, from the policy development, and that all parties must be willing to compromise in order to achieve those objectives. I think there was also one point very important that was mentioned, that actions to address lead in paint would require change. And then if we are implement changes, then we require to earn the engagement and ownership of all relevant partners, and coordination for this is very, very important. Another second aspect that was identified as key for addressing lead in pain is enforcement and compliance, and so that the work should not only focus on the legal side, on enacting the lead paint laws, but also on the enforcement and compliance of that legislation. So a holistic approach should be considered when addressing lead in paint. Yes, the legislation is extremely important, but once that legislation is enacted, the countries should have the necessary testing and laboratory capacities to facilitate enforcement of the law. The law should have their self-regulatory and compliance provisions, and adequate resources and advanced planning should be put in place to ensure enforcement once these legislations are enacted. And last but not least, awareness raising. One gap that was also highlighted by several of our panel members is knowledge and information. There's the need that everyone recognize that we need to act, and people need to be aware of the harms of lead. If the effects of lead in paint, which as was mentioned, sometimes are very in the long term, if people do not realize the harmful effects, then there's no action. So information and education campaigns, awareness raising events is important. If a good policy or a law is not understood by the end user, then there is not success. So countries should not spare any efforts in conducting awareness raising campaigns to all audiences. And the public support is important, but also the private sector, the paint industry support is also ultimately necessary to comply with the new regulations. So early engagement of the industry is also critical. So then, although there has been so much progress on addressing lead in paint, 84 countries to date have a lead paint legislation in place. We still have a lot of work to do, and over 100 countries are still to enact lead paint laws, and the time to act is now. So thanks again for this invitation and for being part of this panel, and I look forward to hearing the closing remarks of this event. Over.
Great, thanks so much, Eduardo. I see hands clapping. You did well on reporting on this important session, which highlighted a number of candidates and the winning policy of Future Policy Award. Great, thanks so much for this comprehensive report. So please, Samir, come and share with us the results of the survey before we go into the panel discussion. There are some really important people in line and who would like to share their important insights on international development. So the floor is yours, but we will need to then start with the debate. Thanks.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great. So yes, what is the result? So we ask you, dear participant, to fill out a survey and to choose which of the 3 policy recommendations are the most important to you in your country. And the survey results are really interesting. Most of you indicated that policy recommendations number 7, creating pathways to a toxic-free future by inspiring the evaluation and adoption of safer alternatives, plays a crucial role in your country. On the other side of the spectrum was policy recommendation number 4, ensuring that workers and communities are understanding chemicals and can act on the danger they are facing. Only 3 of you opted for this recommendation. Besides policy recommendation 7, policy recommendation number 3, promulgate rules that every child is being exposed, and policy recommendation number 6 on realizing the power of effective regulations and cost recovery instruments are amongst the top 3 recommendations. We as organization work a lot with policy recommendation 2, recognize the harm from chemicals across borders, so can solutions too. With our Future Policy Award, we seek to highlight exactly these solutions and work to present the 3 award winning policies to stakeholders so that they are replicated by municipalities, regions, and countries all around the world. However, all recommendations play a vital role to achieve a toxic-free future for all. Thank you, Ingrid.
Thanks so much, Samia, for these insights into the survey results, and thanks everyone for participating in this survey. So now please join me here on stage. We have some excellent speakers, so I would like to welcome once again Dr. Monica Medved, Chief of the Chemicals and Health Branch from UNEP. Then we have here with us Ms. Marlene Fijen-Paxay, Chairperson of the Climate and Sustainability Committee of Region Stockholm. In Sweden, we have Dr. Lynn Persson, Head of the International Department of the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation. And we have here with us from Brussels, Ms. Tatiana Santos, Policy Manager for Chemicals and Nanotechnology from the European Environmental Bureau. Welcome, very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. And let's start the debate right now. First point, please. This conference is another call now to act. We need to urgently act, seeing the impact on the environment and children's health. And my first question really, and we would like to start with this sense of urgency that we all share. My first question therefore goes to Dr. Lynn Persson. You lead a scientific research team that recently announced that we have crossed the planetary boundary on chemical pollution, beyond which lies the risk of large-scale impacts of the global ecosystems. What are your main findings? In which ways does this directly impact children's health?
Thank you so much, Ingrid, and thanks for inviting me here today. I'm really happy to be here. Well, you asked me about this research on planetary boundaries that we have conducted. So what are the planetary boundaries? Well, the planetary boundary framework with its 9 boundaries, it summarizes our dependence on the geological conditions that have prevailed on Earth for the last 10,000 years or so. And the framework also defines what is called the safe operating space for us as humanity. And this is really crucial information for us. I mean, we are the first planet-changing species ever, and we really know to learn how to live better on the planet. So together with a group of scientists, I have worked specifically on the planetary boundary for chemical pollution. And we have reached the conclusion that we are not any longer within the safe operating space when it comes to chemical pollution. There are over 350,000 chemicals on the market, and we have not done risk assessments for more than a fraction of these. Yet, we use and emit chemicals with ever-increasing speed, and newly designed chemicals are released on the market, in some countries still without any prior assessment, and in many other countries with the risk assessment that is very limited in scope. So what does this mean? It means that we are experimenting with our own health, with the ecosystems on which we depend, and even with the Earth system itself. Mixtures of man-made chemicals are found in all corners of the planet, and in everything living here, including ourselves, as we have talked about today. And apart from known risks with many of the chemicals on the market, we also risk chemical surprises. So surprises with the one we had with one of our man-made chemicals causing thinning of the ozone layer, for instance, or the surprise that we had when we discovered that fossil fuel consumption actually changes the climate. We realized that quite some time ago, but still, it was a surprise when it first dawned upon us. As clearly outlined today, children are especially vulnerable when it comes to exposure to chemicals. But of course, they also stand the largest future risk of living on a planet where today also 5 other planetary boundaries have been crossed. So with the crossing of each of the boundaries, there is an increased health risks for children, and an increased risk for children and also for all of us, of course. So that's a quick summary of the paper.
Of your very important work. Thank you once again for putting that effort together and for publishing it. My next question comes now to Dr. Monica Medved. We heard already in your opening speech the main reasons why UNEP highlights that chemical pollution is a big problem for the environment and human health, including health of children. Do you wish to highlight at this point a particular issue? Perhaps you have a personal story or an example that had personally moved you with intensity. Please share.
Thanks very much for that question, Ingrid. And I would like to perhaps point to a couple of examples. Going back to what I said specifically on the areas of mercury and lead and pesticides. And I don't have a personal experience to share with you, other than to say that perhaps all of us on the panel today are fairly fortunate that we're not growing up in areas where there are many fewer regulations and enforcement of chemicals, even though they're ubiquitous in the environment, as perhaps some of the areas where I have lived and worked in Africa, for example, where people are exposed and don't have the kind of information that we've heard about today, and so are actually unaware of what's happening to their bodies, what's happening to their children, and don't have the choice that we do to either demand change or to choose products in the market. So I think it is really important that we continue this work. We continue to raise awareness, and we don't take for granted the kind of abilities that we have, and that we need to make sure that all of humanity has those kinds of information and choices to make in ensuring that their children are safe. And we've heard a lot today. I just want to sort of point out one thing in the discussions on toxic metals that I was in the room. There's some fantastic work that's being done on developing laws and legislations and moving toward enforcement, implementation and enforcement. But I think one of the things that we keep hearing over and over again is that we need to have, predictable, sustainable financing of all of those regulations and all of those laws to make sure that the policies are implemented in the way that they have been intended and designed. And so I think that there's a space there for us to really discuss what happens next in terms of these good and right intentions and ambitions and laws and policies and legislation in the follow-up to make sure that we truly do eliminate. And that includes the ability to shut down on things like black markets and the illegal trade in chemicals and in products, that find those loopholes or are unable to be enforced simply because the capacity or the resources aren't there to do that. So I just wanted to highlight that as another dimension as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Monica. And from our work, we are very aware that there are many resources that are invested wrongly. And there are many resources that we need to direct and redirect, and we need to disinvest on definitely quite a number of things. So to have the resources for the very important issues, for the really important issues.
Thank you very much, and Monica. So I'd like to ask Tatiana Santos from the European Environmental Bureau. I'm not sure enough because I missed some of the technical support. Have you discussed already what examples of chemical pollution impacting the environment and children's health? And have you discussed this already? And if not, great. Then can you please elaborate a little bit on which of these policies are addressed and are important from your point of view?
Thank you, and hello, everybody. In Europe, unfortunately, there are also examples that show that our chemicals control system, despite being one of the most advanced in the world, is still insufficient to protect our health and the one from our future generations. One example is the proposed ban of very hazardous chemicals, such as PAHs and dioxins, present in baby nappies. So this restriction was proposed in Europe, and it was not supported by the regulatory agency in Europe because the risk could not be proven or quantified. But on the other hand, it could not be discarded either. So what it is proven is the presence of these highly toxic chemicals in nappies the direct dermal exposure 24 hours a day, every day during the first years of life, and the particular vulnerability of babies to toxins. However, the regulatory framework it didn't work to actually prevent this exposure and protect children. Another example is the results of the human biomonitoring project in Europe that was performed across all European countries. The results show, for example, that phthalates, a group of endocrine disrupting chemicals, are present in all our bodies. So despite some of these phthalates were banned already more than a decade ago, our children are still today so highly exposed that they are not safe. And scientists tell us that 90% of the children monitored have too high exposures. So in this case, science have been warning about phthalates harm since the last 20 years, but the regulation measures were not sufficient. And finally, another example is an alarming finding of this human biomonitoring project regarding PFAS, the so-called forever chemicals. Scientists are now describing children as born pre-polluted with alarming, literally, levels of PFOA and PFOS, even at higher levels than their mothers. So this means that the ban of PFAS some 10 years ago, global ban, still affect our children today. The effect of these forever chemicals will be felt for generations to come. So this is, to us, a human rights issue, because this is an involuntary poisoning of future generations. So I think these loopholes in the system to not being able to control chemicals and protect our children has to be addressed urgently.
Thank you very much. And actually, one can really draw similarities between how we treated lead and also when we regulated it as say, similar to PFAS. Thank you very much. I'd like to pose the next question for Ms. Malin Fien-Pascay. What urges you to take action as chairperson of the Climate and Sustainability Committee when looking at the impact of chemical pollution on the environment and children's health in the region Stockholm?
Well, let me start. Thank you so much. Let me start with saying that the region Stockholm is responsible for all healthcare within this county of Stockholm area. So that means, of course, we have quite a large responsibility for all inhabitants in many ways, but not least within the healthcare sector. And we have been working in several different ways with chemicals and hazardous pesticides. For example, we are now using 50% organic foods in patient meals within all the hospitals, which of course also lessens the pesticide use that patients are getting into their bodies. Except for that, we are also having lists, recommended lists of drug prescription for the doctors, and in those lists there also states suggestions for drugs that are using the least hazardous chemicals. So there is also a possibility to choose the least hazardous drug for prescription. And I think, first of all, or lastly, I mean, not first of all, I think you want me to mention our phase-out lists that we have been implementing for many years. We have decided, firstly, we have two different phase-out lists, one stating hazardous chemicals and one stating different products or used in products. And we have been using these lists for all the operations to choose the least to be able to phase out the most hazardous chemicals. It consists about 100 groups and products in these lists, and we have even been awarded with the Future Policy Award for this list recently.
Thank you so much. I think I'd like now to move on to the success factors, because I think that's a very valuable lesson also for the listeners to hear. So, Monica, based on your experience and work as Chief of Chemicals and the Health Branch at UNEP, what were your thoughts when you heard the reports about the success factors being discussed earlier on in the feedback session? Could you elaborate on that? What would be the success factors you think are important?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. And I must say, when I sat back and I listened to the success factors, they just reinforced, I think, in some ways, many of the things that we already knew, and some of the learning that we have used from other areas of work. You always have to engage stakeholders, all stakeholders, and you always have to engage them very early on in the process, and not as an after effect or present them with a near fait accompli of something. And so, the success is to really involve the people who A, are impacted, and B, who may have some solutions or different perspectives from the points of view that they're coming from, and experiences to share. So that has always been one of the hallmarks of developing policy, is that you really do need to reach out to stakeholders. And so that was reinforced, and I think the examples that we heard, at least in the toxic metals room, simply reinforced that, and that it was really important for success. The other type of success that I think we really do need to look at, and this comes into the success in actually implementing the policy, is to make sure that um, you have the ability to, what I guess we would call, mainstream various dimensions into that. So when we look at chemicals and issues of chemicals on their own, and look at the toxicity of a chemical or the presence of a chemical in something, we often need to look at it in a broader context. What is that chemical from a socioeconomic perspective dealing with? And sometimes that's a very hard nut to crack. What are the environmental pathways that you may find that chemical in? What are the human health issues? And so we really do need to take an integrated approach into how we understand chemicals, in our world, not just in the environment or in this or that sector, but how do we look at it as a whole? Because what we're finding out more and more from what Lynn has said in the Planetary Boundaries Report is that we've created such pollution problems that it's ubiquitous, that sometimes we don't know what we're dealing with, because what is pollution? We've talked in the past, maybe not in this forum, about toxic or pollution cocktails, where when we look at individual chemicals, we're looking at them in isolation from when they might exist in the environment, mixed in with a whole lot of other chemicals and a whole lot of other factors that may affect their toxicity or their bioavailability or their accumulation. So we really do need to start looking at what we mean by pollution and chemicals in a much more, I think, integrated way, rather than chemical by chemical, that's for sure. And that's something that UNEP is promoting. How do we look at it from a broader perspective, and not just, and we will never have time to look at every single chemical by chemical, given that there are between 60 and 80,000, known chemicals in the world today, and that they're being produced, more and more and more every year, and introduced into the economy, into the environment, and into our health. So we need to step back and look at things in a much broader and integrated way. So that, to me, has been, somewhere where we need to look at what are those success factors to make sure that we do end up having sustainable by design, something we've talked about in the past, and how do we make sure that we're looking at the right lenses to determine what is sustainable when it comes to chemicals, and how do you implement that in terms of a success factor to know that what you're putting out there is in fact healthy and not harmful. So there's a lot more we could talk about. We could have a webinar on that. But I think those are two success factors of looking from an integrated perspective and also to involve all stakeholders, because they do bring different perspectives to the table. Thanks.
Thank you. And Marlene, if I can turn over back to you. So from the success factors that have been discussed, are there any of these success factors that played a role to make your award-winning policy in the region Stockholm so impactful? And is there some factors that stand out for you?
Well, I think Monica is right, of course, that you have to have a holistic perspective. On the other hand, what we have used for the phase-out list is very hands-on for our operations. And I think that has been the main success factors for our operations. We were defining what were the most hazardous chemicals, and then after defining that and putting that down, we also defined if it was on the phase-out list or a banned list. It's the same list, but still it's defined by different in a different way. And after that, it was rather easy for in procurement and also in the use in the operations to take it into use. So of course, to make it as easy as possible for operations, we have 45,000 employees in Region Stockholm, so it's a lot of people having to work with these lists, and it has to be comprehensive and understandable. And we have had very great results with using these lists, phasing out certain chemicals quite successfully. So I think for us, it is the simplicity has been a success factor, and also that it's been understandable for all employees how to use it.
Yeah, I think that would also be useful to communicate to other stakeholders or other regions or governments to learn what has been successful and why it has worked. Let me now turn to Lynn. What are your thoughts when you're seeing the survey's results? Which policy recommendation do you think should be receiving a priority in policymakers' attention, and why?
Well, thank you. Well, it was an exciting poll of the policy recommendations. I think I would like to lift number 4 that only received 3 votes from from the audience, but I do want to lift out the importance of having a good system for classification and labeling of chemicals. This is, I think, is really a cornerstone of any preventive management system of chemicals. So if I take my chance now, I would give an extra star to that. And this is also something I followed in research, where we've looked at the implementation of the globally harmonized system for classification and labeling. I think this is yet another area where countries have managed to agree on a common goal and an ambition, but then the implementation is really lagging behind. And it's such a pity, because it's a great idea, and it would help a lot if we could actually make it happen. So I would vote for that. But maybe if I can just add something else as well, I think there's one aspect that I'm sort of missing in the list of recommendations, and this would be to somehow look at what I've talked about before. This enormously rapid growth in production and use of chemicals in a situation where we are already outside the safe operating space. One would really need, I think, to acknowledge that without slowing down the increase in number of different chemicals that we invent and release on the market, we will never keep up with risk assessing and managing these chemicals safely. So there is something with this constant flow that we really have to look at. And it's the same way, without reducing the number of different chemicals in products, we will never be able to increase circularity in our material flows the way that we state that we want to do. We want to have a circular economy and so on. But without reducing the number of substances in our products, this will never be possible, thermodynamically speaking, if you ask a chemist, but also, I mean, practically, it's not feasible. The same goes for the different types of plastic. So somehow it's very difficult, but looking at the cap on production of different types of chemicals, the number of different chemicals, how many can we really deal with? And this is, of course, not easy. I'm not saying this as an easy way out. This would, of course, be difficult, but I would argue that the alternative to keep emitting ever more different types of chemicals, that will also not put us in a very easy situation to deal with the management of all these chemicals. So I would like to put that on the table. A cap on the number of substances that we actually use in our societies. We need to look at that, I think. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that's a very important point to raise, and I think that would be another discussion round to go a bit more deeper into that. If I can turn to Tatiana, what do you think from the European perspective, which policy recommendation is particularly critical and why?
Yes, first of all, I would like to agree with Lynn. This is a really important issue, and I think it would be extremely important to also look at the overall production and use of chemicals and industrial chemicals in particular, by, for example, setting strong and legally binding targets, use reduction targets. So this is really a target to reduce the amount of chemicals we are exposed to. But coming back to your question, Anya, for us the most important one is your recommendation one on the use of the precautionary principle. We need to act without delay to early warnings. Today, we've been talking about lead that is known to be harmful since the ancient Greeks. So we really are losing a lot of time, and knowing enough is not by itself sufficient. Acting wisely and in good time is also necessary. So a recommendation to apply what we call in Europe a generic risk management approach to the most harmful chemicals is the best way forward and more efficient way. This means that we don't need specific and very detailed risk assessments, rather than making a general assessment and saying, okay, if the chemical is highly problematic and the exposure is obvious or it's impacting vulnerable population, as in the case of children, we don't have time to lose. It's quite interesting that industry doesn't have to prove the safety of the chemicals to market them, while it is the burden of the authorities to demonstrate a risk that is unacceptable before they can take these chemicals off the market. So this is something that favors market over protection in the end. So we need to change the trigger of these restrictions from demonstrated unacceptable risk to justifying a high concern. This would allow decision makers to act without delay to chemicals that cause irreversible environmental damage or are known to have already polluted the entire planet. At the end of the day, do we really need a comprehensive risk assessment to demonstrate an acceptable risk for chemicals that have polluted over 99% of the planet's population, for example, with PFAS? Or do we need to demonstrate an acceptable risk when we know that babies are born today pre-polluted with even higher levels of PFAS in their bodies than their mothers? So we and the future generations cannot really wait for lengthy years of science to prove the obvious and for regulators to apply common sense. So yeah, this is why your recommendation one is our favorite one, and I think at the end of the day is applying common sense.
I'd like to have closed the plenary discussion by looking forward to some international developments. So if I can pose my next question to Monica. UNEP recently held the second part of its fifth global assessment, UNEA, at which a number of important decisions had been taken. The state of chemicals pollution is at a planetary crisis, as we've heard. So can these international decisions contribute to turn the tide? Over to you.
Thanks for that question. And yes, we did receive through the member states, and remember that UNEP's governing body has universal membership of all member states of the United Nations. And so we received very strong messages and very strong sort of resolution from the member states to tackle chemicals. From the science policy perspective, elevating the crisis of pollution to the same level as climate change and biodiversity loss, and the need for a scientific panel to make sure that we're looking at the right things in the right time. I think, as Tatiana refers to, what are those things that really do need to take priority, that we need to underpin with sound science. So yes, we get a very strong mandate for that. We also did get very strong mandates for chemicals in general, and to work more closely on understanding, the contribution of chemicals to the broader pollution and the societal benefits that we derive, and also the risks that we have. And this time it included asbestos. And so that was something that we have on the radar screen as well. So what you're seeing, and there were other resolutions that touch on chemicals as well, nitrogen management and so forth. So, what it says to me is that member states really are concerned about this and have elevated it to the highest level. And therefore they're not prepared to just let it go. We do have to report on it over the coming months and the next 2 years. And therefore we have the great opportunity to work with all of you to make sure that these kinds of resolutions that governments say they want the world to look at, and they want UNEP as the highest authority on the environment to take at a much higher level, and to keep and hold to account those self-same governments who have said they want to do this. So we have an opportunity to hold them accountable in a way. You told us to do this, we've done it, here's the science, here's the evidence, here's the recommendations, and here are pathways to implement it. So it's really up to governments, and that's where, again, we go back to engaging stakeholders from the very, very beginning to be successful. So it all comes for full circle in that way. So yes, getting back to your original question, there's always that opportunity to create the change that governments themselves say they want, and that they want help in making. And really, we have huge opportunity to do that now.
Thank you very much, Monica. Tatiana, just to add on, because my next question is for you. In Europe recently, the new restriction roadmap on chemicals was published. So the new proposal you stated in a press release would constitute the world's largest ever ban on toxic chemicals. So is this a bold detox plan, a historic step forward for Europe? What are your thoughts on that?
Indeed, we really welcome this commitment by the European government. It comes from a promise in the European Chemical Strategy for Sustainability to ban the most harmful chemicals in everyday products. So this is a quite bold approach. If applied properly and well implemented, Europe will actually greatly accelerate the way it eliminates harmful chemicals, because they will block the use of large families of chemicals instead of regulating by one. As Monica was saying before, we will never catch up if we try to continue this one-by-one approach. We predict that this great detox will affect from 5,000 to 7,000 of the most notorious chemicals, and we expect that they will be gone by 2030. This includes the ban of all flame retardants, substances that are frequently linked to cancer, all bisphenols widely used in plastics, but that disrupt hormones. It will also ban all forms of PVC plastic and restrict the PFAS, forever chemicals. plus around 2,000 harmful chemicals found in baby diapers, pacifiers, baby bottles, and other childcare products. So for us, this is really a new chapter in facing down and growing the threat of harmful chemicals. And it's a promise to improve the safety of almost all manufactured everyday products and rapidly lower the chemical intensity of our schools, our homes, our workplaces. All that said, this is a political commitment and not yet action. So we'll be watching officials closely to ensure that they walk the talk and certainly implement this restrictions roadmap.
So, Lynn, as you've just listened to Monica and to Tatiana, do you think that will bring us closer to a toxic-free future?
Yes, I mean, these are definitely things that will help on the way. It's not the only thing that we can do, but it will be great. I will also have the honor of watching the development and make sure that we walk the talk on the restrictions. Yeah, I will do my part to help with that. And if I can add also to what Monica said before about the latest UN Environment General Assembly, there was also a decision to agree on a plastic treaty, which I think was a great step ahead also when we talk about all the chemicals, additives in plastics. So I think there are many hopeful signs, and not the least actually that with the help of UNEP, we have also now managed to get through, I think, with this triple crisis concept, so that you hear more and more talk actually about the pollution crisis also, which was not the case 10 years ago. So I think this has really been a successful a broadening of the awareness, which is really important. So that also gives me hope.
Yes, thank you very much. And that's just as a closing round, I would like to ask for each of you, like a closing sentence for the future, what you think, what you would give away to the audience. So just one sentence as a takeaway. Please take your time.
Okay, that's always very difficult to do. But one of my, I think, favorite wrapping up statements is, just remember that each and every one of us can make a difference, and that everything we do, everything we bring to the table, all of our expertise, all of our passion, all of our networks, everything. Never forget that you can make a difference. And so, yeah, this is fantastic. So everybody, keep doing it.
And what's your sentence or takeaway message, Malin?
I think that I must say, considering these sessions that we're having, bringing awareness to the table is, of course, the first step, just as Lynn said. But of course, in many parts of the world, the problem is much bigger than perhaps in Sweden. So I think cooperation, sharing the good examples. Of course, I'm willing to do that anytime, and awareness is my sentence.
Thank you, Tatiana. What's yours?
We came to a point in history where we can no longer ignore the harm of chemicals inflicted on children. So we cannot put the chemicals on hold, but we can take urgent action. So we need a paradigm shift and prevention over control, and that puts protection over markets. And it acts urgently against the most harmful chemicals we are all exposed to.
Thank you. And Lynn, what's yours?
Well, I agree with all the others, of course, but so maybe I will just say then turn off the tap, to refer back to my suggestion of a cap on production. Turn off the tap.
Yes, thank you very much. So dear panelists and dear audience, we have come to the end of our panel discussions. I've checked in between if there were any questions, so there weren't any. That's why hopefully we can have more of a discussion at the next event. Thank you very much for your inspiring contribution, and and your experience you shared with us, and thank you everybody for participating. It would be great to see you in person later in the networking part of the conference. I now hand over to Alexandra Wande, who's the Executive Director of the World Future Council, for her concluding remarks. Over to Alexandra.
Thank you.
It's been really inspiring to listen to all of the different speakers and experts, and also to look into specific topics that we had in the different working groups, such as the highly hazardous pesticides, and also the workshop we had on toxic metals. We at the World Future Council are very grateful for all of the esteemed speakers, their expertise. They've brought in their wisdom, their knowledge they've been working on for a long time already on this important topic. And of course, we're very grateful also to all of your participants. And we hope you all will become now ambassadors for a future without toxins. And this is really without REACH. We have heard that there are inspiring solutions from around the world. We have also heard that now there's a new initiative within the European Union to have a better protection from hazardous chemicals. We certainly need to step up action. We know that we have crossed the planetary boundary and that we have a responsibility to protect our children and future generations from toxic chemicals. So with that, I also, of course, want to thank the team at the World Future Council who has worked tirelessly to prepare this. So let me thank also Ingrid Fritsche, Damien Kramer, Samir Kassid, and also our media team with Nadine and also with Anna. And also, of course, I want to invite you to continue following our activities of the World Future Council. We will actually be publishing a publication together with UNITAR, also with the support of UNEP. And it will be on the topic of children and toxic chemicals, including the policy recommendations. We will, of course, take into consideration the very insightful discussions we had here today. So we will launch this publication around World Environment Day in early June. And we were hoping really to make a contribution to Stockholm Plus 50, the conference that will take place now in early June. So with that, let me thank you all again, and let me conclude, and let's all work towards a toxic-free future in the interest of current and future generations. Thank you so much. Goodbye.